Step into the mystical realm with Paranormal M, your gateway to the otherworldly. Immerse yourself in the quest for concealed realities and discover the most chilling tales from the paranormal domain. Ensure that you subscribe and activate notifications to remain linked to our enigmatic and hair-raising escapades. Drop an M in that comment box. My grandmother Ida had sight. To preface, my grandmother was 14 when she and her 5 younger siblings became orphans. I'm not sure if that maybe led to her, I hesitate to say, abilities. I wanted to be a skeptic, but I finally believe. Compiled below are just a few stories of her encounters. Not sure if these fit with this sub, but let me know. Checking in to say hello. One night Ida was sitting up in bed reading. The only light is overhead. She looked up to see someone in the doorway, thinking it was one of her 5 kids. Those Catholics waste no time. She said, "Get back in bed." They didn't move. She goes back to reading, thinking maybe her kid was just half asleep and they'd find their way back anyways. 60s parenting was just to ignore all the children. She looks up again to see 2 figures this time. She got frustrated that now 2 kids escaped their room and got out of bed, walking toward the doorway. But she realizes there's a taller figure with broad shoulders and a shorter one. She could make out that one was a man and the other was a woman. She walked toward them and they dissipate. She told me she wasn't scared but felt almost comforted. She went into the hall to be sure that it wasn't her kids. Nothing. She laid in bed long enough to realize it was her parents in the doorway. She didn't recognize them since she hadn't seen them in about 20 years. Saying goodbye through a computer. She had Alzheimer's, and we didn't know she was living with bone cancer. Came quick. Not all the family made it to the hospital before she passed. While in the hospital, she held conversations with her sister, who had passed years before. The day she passed, my uncle was still stuck at work. He said his computer just turned off. He was frustrated because it was the last hour of work. But instead of the computer saying shutting down, as Windows did back then, the message said goodbye, and then the screen remained black. Took him a few tries with the power button to get it back on. Didn't register at first, he just thought it was some new update. He got a call 30 minutes later from family that his mother had passed. We all believe it was my grandmother saying goodbye to her only child that couldn't make it to the hospital in time. Saving her sister. My grandmother woke up in the middle of the night in a panic. She had this insane feeling that something bad was about to happen to her sister, whom she hadn't seen in about a year. My grandmother lived in Virginia, called her sister living in upstate New York, to tell her that she needed to go to a doctor as soon as possible. Ida wouldn't get off the phone until her sister agreed to go and get a physical exam. The next day, my great-aunt was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. The doctor told my great-aunt that they rarely caught breast cancer that early. This was in the 80s. She remained in remission the rest of her life. I'm a skeptic, but I now genuinely believe my house is haunted by spirits. I live with my family in a late 17th/early 18th century farmhouse. My grandmother has lived in one side for many years and had an incident where children were playing in the hallway one day when she was the only person home. The house hadn't been renovated for 100 years or so we had to do it. We had a roofer in to do the redo of the roof. One day he said to my dad that he met our spirits, a little girl who had apparently lost her shoe, and that they were very pleasant. Apparently he didn't know whether or not to say anything to my dad for fear of putting him off. Before moving in, I had an experience where I was outside with my mom and sister. We heard a rapping at the window, 3 knocks, loudly. There was nobody inside, and nothing could have caused 3 distinct knocks. My dad had exactly the same experience a few months ago. My dad has heard footsteps coming from upstairs when there's nobody home. Doors have opened and closed on their own. My mom once saw that she thought she saw me in the house, distinctly a person similar to me though. Yet there was nobody home. I have a question. I've actually sat down and tried to speak to this spirit. I've asked questions and asked for a sign that I'm heard. Is there any way to get the spirit's attention or response without a seance or a Ouija board? Is it possible? As I said, I'm a skeptic, but after reading all 3 volumes of the 14 times, it happened to me, and researching astral projection, I'm no longer so sure that spirits don't exist. A further question is, why doesn't everybody leave a spirit behind when they die? Need help identifying what I saw last night. For the record, today is Friday, August 18th, 2023. I'm a single 44-year-old female. I don't do drugs and I only drink socially. Last night I had not had anything to drink. I was awoken early this morning around 3:39 a.m. by my palm chin puppy Joey. He was growling and barking. He was looking out my bedroom door into the hall. I could hear footsteps on my floor. They sounded like human footsteps, but there was also a strange click, like someone's nails touching the floor. I immediately got up, turned on the light. I went to go check out my small apartment for an intruder. There was no one there, so I grabbed a drink of water, came back to bed. When I got to bed, I said, "In the name of Jesus, I claim protection on myself and all those that live in this house." I have a family that lives in the apartment upstairs, too. I read a few Bible passages and fell asleep watching some Christian ASMR. I was woken up again around 5:30 a.m., this time by Joey's growling and barking. When I opened my eyes, I was confused because right above me and slightly to my right was a gray, dimly glowing entity. I think when I first awoke, it was really close to me, but I had fallen asleep with my Bible in my hand. I don't believe it touched me. It moved swiftly, however, up into the right-hand corner of my room closest to me. There it crouched, almost like a cat before pouncing. It glowed enough to dimly light the room. At first, I thought it looked like a skeleton. However, on considering it, I think it had long, thin, ropey muscles throughout. I couldn't make out a clear face. It moved quickly after a few seconds and darted over top me to the left side of the room. At the same time, I reached over and turned on the bedside table light. When I did, it was gone. There's a little more to add to the story, and I hope someone can help me identify this thing and what I should do. I called my sister this morning, described to her exactly what I just shared to you. She surprised me by saying she knew exactly what I had seen. She said she saw a video of, one of these things taken by a man filming his friends on a rooftop. She described it as looking like Gollum from Lord of the Rings with a face that's indistinct. Except for the glow, that was pretty accurate. Has anyone seen this video? I can't find it. She says that the show described this entity as a lower-level demon. They're almost always controlled by someone sent with the purpose of causing mischief. I hadn't told her yet, but I got a name when I saw that entity, but it didn't make much sense, so I just filed it. I've been blessed since childhood with being able to discern spirits, but as a Christian, I don't play in that pool. I don't seek these kinds of things, and I'm kind of interested in advice on what I should do, though. I wasn't terrified, but I also don't want more late-night visits by whatever that was. Should I say something to the person I think sent it? How would you even go about that? I pray and believe in the power of the Holy Spirit and Jesus over demons. Should I do anything else? Any idea what this was? All because of a PS3. I want to start off by saying that I'm usually very skeptical when it comes to unexplainable things. At least I try to be, and it served me well to keep my cool in otherwise scary situations. However, for the life of me, I still can't find an explanation for what I saw that day, and I'd like to emphasize that this story is 100% real. Like every good story, I'm going to start with some context. Sometime back in 2012, I was 14 years old. I'd just moved to America the year prior without my parents, so I was staying with my uncle for the time being. This particular uncle, he was the youngest of all of his siblings. All that to say that we weren't that far apart in age. He was around 21, which in my eyes made him the cool uncle. He had the same sense of humor and similar interests. Why is this important, you ask? Well, imagine being 21 and single and suddenly you have to start taking care of a 14-year-old. Needless to say, he didn't stop his partying life just because I was around. So sometime in that year, my uncle started seeing this girl. Let's call her Anne. He'd go over to Anne's apartment after work all the time to hook up and then come back to sleep at the house, then repeat the next day. Well, he wanted to start spending the night at her place, planned to go spend the weekend with her. But because I was living with him, and the whole being new to this country thing, he didn't want to just leave me, just all home alone. What was his solution? To ask me to spend the night at her apartment too, of course. She was older and had a very nurturing personality and had a 3-bedroom apartment to herself, so she didn't mind at all. She even encouraged it. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if it was actually her idea to have him ask me. I wasn't super thrilled about the arrangement, not because of how awkward it could be, but because of how kind of boring the whole thing was going to be for me. Back then, I didn't have a smartphone or a gaming console or anybody to buy them for me. I did have a laptop, but she didn't have Wi-Fi. So in the middle of the week when I went to hang out with a friend, he actually agreed to let me borrow his PS3 for the weekend. It was actually his older brother's who wasn't staying with him at the time, and he had an Xbox, so we didn't really care. So long as I brought it back in one piece, of course I could use it. So the weekend comes and we head over to her apartment. They're actually more like townhouses connected together by a wall. Specifically, this is a low-income housing complex, and it has a terrible reputation in our small town for being the easiest spot to get whatever drug you wanted. The reason this matters is because when we got there was actually a couple fighting outside her unit, and upon parking in front of them, they went inside. I found this odd because my uncle told me Anne lives by herself. So as it turned out, both Anne's sister and her boyfriend had just gotten out of jail the day before and were staying with Anne for some time. But because we were staying the night, they were going to spend the night somewhere else. But they hadn't left yet. So we go and meet everybody. The sister and boyfriend look exactly like you would expect from somebody with heavy drug use and smoking. The boyfriend in particular stood out to me because it's the first time I've ever seen anybody with a face tattoo in real life. Anyway, I let the adults mingle. Meanwhile, I went to go to the other room to play the PS3. Pretty much stay on it the whole time. Must have been around 11 p.m. when the other couple finally left. My uncle and Anne went upstairs to their room to, quote-unquote, take care of business. Eventually, I too went upstairs to the room I was staying at. I laid down and took out my laptop. I think I started playing Plants vs. Zombies or some other half-baked flash game I had available offline. I don't quite remember. About an hour goes by and I start hearing some commotion downstairs. A lot of noise and some talking. It was loud enough that I could hear it upstairs, but I didn't wake up my now asleep uncle and Anne. Thought it was odd because it was only the three of us, so I didn't know who could be downstairs making all this noise. I figured, maybe Anne's sister and her boyfriend came back. They're doing whatever downstairs. So I didn't pay much attention to it. That was until I remembered the PS3. I'd left it downstairs hooked up to the TV living room. Now listen, I'm not one to judge a book by its cover, but I found it a little sketchy that they left and came back when everybody was asleep, so I didn't want to leave it downstairs because I was afraid of it being stolen by whom I thought were sketchy people, especially when the PS3 wasn't mine, and I knew if it got stolen, I was going to have to pay my friend for it. I debated whether to go downstairs and get it or not. I thought if I went downstairs just to get the PS3 and went back upstairs, it may come off as rude to them. I didn't want them to think that I thought they were going to steal it, even though I did. After thinking on it for a while, I finally decided, screw it. I don't know if it comes off as rude. I'm not about to pay for it if anything happens to it. Meanwhile, the whole time the loud noises can still be heard, but I couldn't really make up any of the voices anymore. I finally make up the courage to head downstairs. And as soon as I open the door from the bedroom, I find it super odd that everything is dark. If there was people downstairs, I figured they'd have the lights on. You can see the downstairs light reflection on the stairway. I get to the stairway and still everything's dark, but the noise feels louder. I could tell the noise is coming from the kitchen. The way the house is set up is you have to go through the kitchen in order to get to the living room. So I start walking into the kitchen slowly, not sure of what I'm about to find. This is when I'm finally close enough to peek in. What I see? Well, I'm not sure how to properly describe it in a way that'll do it justice. Everything. And I mean everything that was sitting on the kitchen counters and the stove was moving. I'm talking about pans, pots, knives, all kinds of utensils, condiments, sauces, the dish rack, all things on top of the stove, bell, oven mitts, pans hanging from the hooks on the wall. They're all moving and shuffling. They're bouncing up and down as if doing some weird kind of dance. Try holding your phone or keyboard and make it hit the table on both ends back and forth really fast like a seesaw. That's what all these things were doing. Let me reiterate. All of these unanimated objects were bouncing up and down so loudly that I could hear it upstairs as if they had a life of their own. I'm aware of how ridiculous that sounds, and I have no proof of it, but I swear on my life that this is true. This was happening only in the kitchen for some reason. So what did I do upon seeing this possibly supernatural event happening right in front of my eyes? Nothing. Right at the moment anyway, I think to myself, it's kind of weird. Then I head over to grab the PS3, walk past again the possibly alive kitchen, then go upstairs back to the room as it kind of acting like nothing happened. It wasn't until I got back to the room that I thought, holy shit, wait a fucking minute, something ain't right here. I could feel the fear starting to set in. That was always a little slow, but I have no idea why I didn't react right there and then. Maybe it was my brain's way of protecting me, or I just couldn't compute it right away. Immediately I got in bed and got under the blanket, because ghosts can't get under the blanket, right? Started hyperventilating for a while until I calmed down. Eventually I fell asleep. The following morning after waking up, I head downstairs. I don't really want to say anything right away, but as we're about to head out, I told my uncle what happened. He kind of laughs it off at first. It's kind of hard to grasp how terrifying that was, because it wasn't some kind of apparition or demon thing. But I repeat to him what happened, and I tell him I'm not joking around, that actually happened. His demeanor changed, and he headed back inside to tell Anne what happened. She tells him about how similar things had happened to her and her sisters just the day before in that apartment. But she didn't want to say anything as not to freak us out. She said she's heard voices. She's even heard a voice call her name and stuff like that, but never see actual physical objects moving on their own. She then proceeded to tell us a story about how some time ago a child had fallen off a flight of stairs and died after breaking their neck on one of the units in the complex where she lived. I don't know how true that is, and it's probably just a way to justify the fear, but regardless, that's the story she told us. To this day, I have no idea what happened. I truly believe there's no logical explanation for what I saw that night, and needless to say, I never went back to that apartment. Whispers in the Shadows. A haunting night in my native village home. Today I'm 20 years old. I grew up in Goa, a city in India, which is a very popular place in India, mostly famous for its beaches and luxurious lifestyle. My native place is a small village far from Goa. There's still our generation's old house and land there. No one lives there now, so it remains closed most of the time. We go to our village only when there's an occasion like a festival or a family function. Ever since I was a child, every time I went to our village home, I felt a strange feeling there. This was a few years ago when I was about 14 years old. We went to our village for a family/religious function. The moment I entered the house, I started to feel a strange and eerie feeling, as if someone was standing, living in the house and moving around inside. At first, I was sleeping in one of the upper floor rooms. Around past midnight, I woke up and started hearing someone's whispering in unintelligible voices around me. I kept hearing those voices all night and couldn't sleep. I was already feeling uncomfortable and unsafe in that house from day one, but I couldn't be able to tell anybody about it in the fear that no one would believe me. But the next day, something happened that changed both my life and me. I haven't been able to forget that incident until today. At that night, too, I was sleeping alone in the upper room, but I couldn't sleep due to the eerie fear that I've had. In the room of the two transparent glasses were installed on the upper half, so you could only see the outside light. Nothing was visible. It was after midnight. I looked at the door and saw a black shadow of a man standing in the dim light outside. Got very scared and turned to the other side of my bed. Just after that, all I felt was that somebody was choking me on my neck very hard, as if trying to kill me. I could literally feel a very strong hand around my neck pressing with full force. That night in my village home, I lay paralyzed, gasping for breath, as the invisible force tightened its grip around my neck. Panic surged through me and my heart pounded like a drum. I struggled to make a sound, but my voice had deserted me. As seconds felt like an eternity, a rush of thoughts flooded my mind. Was this a malevolent spirit that had haunted our family home for generations? Or is it some sinister intruder with malicious intent? My mind raced, but there was no rational explanation for the relentless assault on my throat. In the throes of desperation, I mustered all my strength and faith, silently chanting a prayer of Hanuman Chalisa. Miraculously, the grip began to loosen, and I could finally breathe again. Gasping for air, I turned to the bedside lamp, but the room was empty. I was alone, yet the sensation of an ominous presence lingered. Terrified and shook to my core, I dared not spend another moment in that room. I hastily made my way downstairs to where my family was sleeping, determined to share my harrowing experience. As I recounted the night's horrors, their expressions turned from skepticism to concern. They too had sensed something amiss during their time in the house. With the first dawn of light, we decided to leave the village, abandoning my home for the time being. The memories of that night haunted me for years, but I couldn't help but wonder about the enigmatic history of our family's old house and the eerie forces that seemed to dwell within. To this day, I carry the weight of that chilling encounter, forever changed by the inexplicable and terrifying events that transpired in my native village. I don't believe ghost box voice apps are legit, but did have an interesting experience recently. One of two. Went on vacation with my 54-year-old female sister B, female 48 and niece S, a female 28, and our hometown. Okay. Wanted to put flowers on our grandmother's grave. The cemetery is quite old. the first in town, and both sides of my family have plots, which is nice because we can visit everybody in one trip. My niece and I love the paranormal. My sister is less enthused, but tries her best. We downloaded the VoiceBox app for fun and went to visit at dusk. When we get to Graham's headstone at the top of the hill, which backs to the woods, my app says Ellen. My grandmother's name is Eleanor. My niece starts asking a bunch of questions, but nothing interesting happens. We hear rustling in the woods. I was thinking squirrel or chipmunk scrounging in the leaves. B gets freaked out and dashes to the car a few feet away as I was telling S that I think the app is fake, and it needs to say something super relevant without sound cues from us. I noticed my sister bailing, walking to the car. My app says, "Don't go." B gets into the driver's seat and I hop into the passenger side. My app clearly said, "Are you running?" Then the oddest laugh came out, gave me shivers. Fake or not, I was totally entertained because that was pretty relevant. My sister? Well, she wasn't. 2 of 2. Was telling my son in text what happened and sent him the audio file. He was at home 9 hours away. He got curious and downloaded the app himself. He asked if anybody was with us. Me, his aunt, and cousin. The response was blessed. Weird. He decided doing this in his room at night was creepy and shut it off. BS and I started the 9-hour drive home, going through New York, half a mile to the GW Bridge. They tried to kill us, Final Destination style. On our left was a steep grassy hill. At the top was more road headed north. We were southbound. B is driving. A huge square of cement came tumbling end over end down the hill and slammed into the front of her car, slightly above and to the left of the driver's side headlight. She tried to maneuver and slow down, but couldn't in time. She ended up running over the block, which ripped the whole underside of her car out. Airbags deployed, none of us were injured. She had seatbelt burn on her neck, but S and I? Nada. Not a bump, not a scratch. We didn't even experience a jolt when it hit. It was surreal. Why is this relevant? Blessed. I'd say we were. Had my first ever paranormal experience tonight. So my boyfriend and I went out and toured a local plantation tonight. We had about 20 to 30 people besides us on the tour. There were 2 tour guides. The only lights we had on the tour were their flashlights, save a couple of candles in 1 or 2 of the rooms. The tour guide led us into what the guide claims is the second most active room in the plantation house. Started talking about the activity that's occurred there. My boyfriend was leaning against a heavy closet door. Said door swung outward, so my boyfriend was putting pressure and force on the door. The door was the original door that was built with the plantation. It doesn't close nicely, meaning you have to kind of body slam the door to get it to close. All of a sudden the door opened by itself. No joke, my boyfriend did not turn the doorknob, nor did I. Inside the closet was a portable air conditioner and plenty of boxes lined up wall to wall, stacked way up high. There was no person hidden inside. My boyfriend said that he felt the door open with force. It opened wide enough to the point where he was almost squished against the wall. We've been home a couple of hours, but as I'm typing this, I'm still in disbelief. There is no logical explanation for why this happened. The plantation doesn't have an air conditioning. There was no fan blowing a gust of wind in the closet. Still giddy and in awe of what happened. First paranormal experience ever, oh my god. Just thought I'd share. Just if anybody's curious, I'm based in Northwest South Carolina. The plantation we visited has a record of 21 deaths on the property. Weird experience. Big man. First off, I've always been skeptical about the paranormal myself, but I've always been open-minded to the subject and liked the stories. But yesterday, I experienced something that, to me, was and is really, really weird. My 2-year-old son was asleep in his room. I was in another room. This is when he suddenly called out for me, "Dad," and crying a bit. Nothing unusual. I came in and picked him up, and I could tell he was in a state of half sleep and half awake. He kept crying a bit, so I asked him, "What's the matter, son?" He, "Big man." Me, "Big man?" Him, "Yes, big man." In the dark, I looked around the room and couldn't see anything, so I just said with a low voice to the nothingness, "What the fuck do you want?" Immediately as I finished that sentence, I got this sudden chilling feeling all over my body. I've had chills before, but never this way. My son slept the whole night, and I haven't mentioned it again. I have no idea what to think of it, but I definitely feel like something left the room that night. Good? Bad? I don't know. What do you think? Has anybody tried something similar? Friday the 13th, October 2023, Shadow Hand, out-of-body sleep paralysis. So I struggle with mental health sometimes, on top of being too sensitive with my intuitive abilities, which I've been developing over the span of 25 years. So I've been struggling a bit lately and tried admitting myself to the hospital days before October 13th while I was still coherent enough to explain, not really feeling it with my mental shit. My aim was to get to see a specialist. A stay in a place for like 30 days. So day 2 or 3 of being there, after raging, being strapped down and fed pills, I calmed down. I'm escorted to another area, had a private room, bathroom, and a shower. I shouldn't have dropped the tab of acid when I just arrived there the day of admission. Anywho, I'm now in this private room. I knew it was Friday the 13th, not too superstitious, but was aware that it was. But I couldn't sleep well. Then all of a sudden I feel like I'm dying or need help as I crawl toward the closed hospital room's door, hoping nurses would be on the other side to help me. But I just remembered the door opening. A slight, and I say, "Help me, help me," reaching toward a dark shadow hand. I was assuming it was a nurse or a doctor. I just remember saying, "I need you to help me." Felt like I started to lift up as it pulled me up from my hand, yet instantly I'm back in the bed again. But that was not a doctor, just a shadow hand. Why did I abruptly end up back in the bed? Felt strange, but like, how the fuck? I walked out and explained to the nurses what I saw. Asked them to watch the cam for orbs around me being serious, but anyway. Somehow it all went to shit, and they booted my crazy ass out of the hospital again. But I was able to run into the hospital worker in the elevator. Asked her which button was ground floor. Was 1, but I hit 0, which was underground. She said I probably ventured 2 down around the morgue. Anyway, so conclusion, her recently departed spirit probably followed me from down there. Or it was just an out-of-body sleep paralysis thing. Not sure. Sorry for the broken, sloppy description there. Cheers. One of my paranormal experiences. During the summer of 2008, I stayed with my aunt and uncle for a few months, because I wasn't getting along with my parents. Another story for another day. While staying there, I worked overnights as a local convenience store clerk. During the day, I was mostly alone while my aunt and uncle worked. At this point in my life, I had not experienced anything paranormal and did not believe in ghosts or spirits, or the afterlife. I was 19 and knew everything. However, as soon as I moved in, I was faced with experiences that changed my perspective forever. The first one, I was alone. It was about 9 a.m. and I just finished my shift. and I was preparing to wind down and get ready for bed. I was alone as usual. Both my aunt and uncle were working, so I had the house to myself. I was sitting in the downstairs living room eating. Out of seemingly nowhere, I heard what sounded like an adult running through the kitchen, which paralleled the living room and was completely out of view to me. A bang, and the footsteps went into the den that connected to the kitchen. I bolted up and went to the kitchen to investigate the sound. There was a coffee pot on the floor. That must have been the bang I heard when it hit the floor. I headed toward the den to see who was in there. However, it was empty. There was no way for anybody to have been in the den and me not see them. I shrugged it off, figured I was tired, and went back to bed. A few weeks later, my alarm woke me up at 9 a.m. for work. p.m. I groggily got up and headed toward the bathroom that was directly across from my room. However, the door was shut. I could see the light shining from under the door, and I heard the distinct sound of somebody sweeping the floor. Swish, 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 sounded like an old-fashioned straw broom. I found this very odd considering nobody besides myself used that bathroom. I couldn't think of really why anybody would be sweeping at 9 p.m. at night. But I patiently waited some time for whoever was in there to finish up. After a few minutes, I couldn't wait any longer because I had to start getting ready for work. I approached the bathroom door. I could still hear the sweeping, by the way. I gently knocked and asked if they were almost done. But to my surprise, the sound abruptly stopped. I opened the door and no one was in there. I brushed this experience off as well, pushed it to the back of my mind. This last experience is the reason I ended up moving out. It was too terrifying to ignore what I knew was happening in that house. My sister stopped by during the day to see me, and her and I were in the back room hanging out and chatting. The door to the hallway was closed. My aunt and uncle were working, so her and I were the only two people who were home. As we gabbed away, we suddenly heard what sounded like 1920s music coming from downstairs. We froze. We fell silent. The music grew louder and louder until it sounded like it was coming from every corner in the house. The music sounded like it was being played from a record player. My sister and I just stared at one another, too terrified to speak. Then we heard what sounded like a party erupting from downstairs. It sounded like 30 or more people down there. Sounds of laughing, talking, chinaware clinking filled the house. Then what we heard next terrified me. Loud, heavy footsteps started making their way upstairs where my sister and I were. Boom, boom, boom. It was slow, but purposeful. The party sounds and music had reached a deafening level, but I could still hear those heavy footsteps above all other sounds. Eventually, I heard the footsteps make its way to the second floor. Then they slowly started stomping toward the closed door. This is where me and my sister were sitting behind. When the footsteps reached our door, I leapt up and yanked the door open. When I did, all the noise in the house stopped. The party, the music, the stomping. There was no one behind the door. The hallway was empty and the house was dead silent again. My sister and I wasted no time racing out of the house and stayed inside until our aunt and uncle came home. They didn't believe our story, and I moved out shortly afterwards, never stepped foot in that house again. Four experiences from my youth. 1. Pranked. I was completely home alone one evening. I turned off the TV in my bedroom, and it was like a 90s-style box TV. You know the ones. Anyway, I go shower. When I got out of the shower, the TV wouldn't turn back on. Did the power go off? Nope, all the lights are on. So the power isn't out. Maybe the TV's power cord got loose. Checked behind the TV, it wasn't just the power cord. It was also the cord to my VCR and cable box. All 3 cables had been disconnected. All 3. Did someone come home and try to play a prank on me? Nope. A quick tour of the house confirmed I was home alone. And how would they have known I was watching TV before I showered? Oh my goodness. Has somebody broken in and tried to steal my TV? Well, I don't think so. Hadn't noticed anything just moments ago. Plus, why would they want my ratty old TV when there's nicer stuff in the home, including a nicer TV in the living room? Another quick tour of the house this time, looking under the beds and in the closets. I even went into my parents' bathroom and peeked in the shower. Nothing. No one. Back in my room, I plugged all the cables back in with as much courage and calmness as I could muster. I said something like, "Okay, you got me." It didn't think that was funny. "Please don't do that again," I said. Went about my evening until my parents and sibling came back home. Disembodied voices. It was about 2 a.m. and I hung up the phone with my girlfriend. I heard what I thought was muffled voices over white noise. Maybe a TV was on. My sibling, a room over, was scared of the dark and would usually put the TV on to go, just to sleep with on a sleep setting. Thought maybe they forgot to do that. When I opened the bedroom door, the voices sounded lower, but the white noise sounded louder, and as if it were coming from the direction of my sibling's bedroom. I made my way to the bedroom, but when I put my ear up to the door, the noise now sounded like it was coming from the living room, the front of the house. Maybe this was some sort of nighttime Doppler effect thing. I made my way to the living room down to a T-shaped hallway, and the noise gets louder. But as soon as I come to the front of the house that opens up to the living room, nothing. Silence. Room is completely gone. No noise. Number 3. Did the dark just play a trick on me? I felt hands gently shake me awake right at my shoulder and chest. When I opened my eyes, I saw a figure in the shape of a man, but darker than the dark of my bedroom, kneeling at my bedside. The second I saw it, I knew it wasn't a man, but I don't know how I knew that, and that it didn't want to harm me, just to wake me up. A second later, it stood up and took a step back and completely vanished. I sat up and looked around. Number 4. What the fucking hell? Something startled me awake, and when it did, I was wide awake and I was afraid. Suddenly I heard what sounded like a plastic bag being ruffled at the doorway to my bedroom. I couldn't explain why that noise was so scary, but I was basically terrified when the noise moved from the door to the center of my bedroom, to the front of my bed, to right next to my bed. I was panicking. What the fucking hell is going on? But I was so scared I was frozen. The only thing I could move were my eyes. Suddenly the noise was gone, but I felt something straddle me. Like literally there was this pressure on my hips and on my chest. That's when I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to make myself sit up, but failed. I couldn't move. I then felt this odd wispy-like presence hover right above my mouth, almost like a feathered kiss to my lips. Then it was gone. To date, these have been the only paranormal experiences I've ever encountered. Experience number 1 was the first one. Number 2 followed. I don't remember which came next, whether it be number 3 or 4. These all happened while I was in high school, too. Sometime between 1998 and 2002. Over the 20 years ago now, knock on wood. Haunted Lodge at Shaw AFB. In March of 2011, my family moved to Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. Our house on base wasn't ready for us to move into, so we had to stay a couple of days in lodging. How our room was set up was when you walked in, you would walk directly into a living room area where we had 2 pull-out couches that pulled into very squeaky twin beds. This area then connected to the kitchenette. Then you had a separate bedroom that my mom and her husband slept in and bathroom off the kitchenette. My little brother and I had to sleep on a pull-out twin bed. They were very squeaky, like I said before. If you made any movement, everybody in the hotel room would know. When we all went to bed that night, I remember turning off the TV and then putting the TV remote on the counter of the kitchenette. I then proceeded to lay down on my squeaky twin bed and scroll on my phone until I got a little bit more tired. I eventually did. I locked my phone, put it underneath my pillow. Then I closed my eyes to go to sleep, but I was still aware of everything around me. In the bedroom off to the kitchenette, my mom and stepdad were laying in bed with the bedroom door open. My stepdad at the time was already asleep, but my mom was up reading, trying to get sleepy. My mom then caught something out of the corner of her eye and looked up into the doorframe. There stood a ghost, a transparent man my mom could see through, but she could tell he was wearing a red plaid shirt, jeans, and boots. She said that he had a beard and dark hair, and he looked pissed that they were laying in that bed. My mom said that he looked so angry, and the entity clenched his fist, walked backwards. The second he walked out of the doorframe, my mom heard me scream. The entity threw the TV remote that was on the counter at my head. It threw the remote so hard that it completely shattered and the batteries flew everywhere. The entity attacked me. I knew it wasn't my brother because I would have heard that he made any noise on that squeaky bed. Plus, he was already asleep for the night. My mom ran straight to me after she heard me scream and then proceeded to tell me what she saw. I was so scared, but my mom and I have an understanding that we both believe in paranormal. She always told me if I saw anything to tell her. She don't believe me. Plus, she already knew I have the gift. I never saw that entity myself, but we both knew what she saw was angry and that it attacked me. This is just one of the many paranormal stories that have happened to me, but I want to know what everybody else thinks. My mom sees deceased relatives in her dreams. I'll start with my mom's encounter that she's told me about. I'll try to make a long backstory short. My parents got emergency custody of 4 of my younger cousins over a decade ago. My dad's brother and his wife never tried to sober up to get the kids back, so they're still with my parents to this day. For years, my aunt and uncle would stalk our house and then threaten my parents with violence and death for taking their kids. It was a battle up until my uncle's death. Without going into details, he died trying to get more drugs. A few months after his death, my mom had a dream. It started off as her in a solid white room. Then an Indian chief head appeared in the sky and was chanting. She didn't know what he was saying, but she said it was a singing and a chanting. Then my uncle appeared in front of her. She said that he looked like he was younger and healthy. He smiled, walked up to her and whispered in her ear, "Sorry, thank you." Then he disappeared and the Indian chief's head and chanting faded out and she woke up in tears. She says this isn't the first time she's had somebody visit her in her dreams. Her grandmother has come into her before to hug her and tell her that she loved her. Others too. But she said this encounter with my uncle felt the most real. She had to wake my dad up and make sure that she wasn't still dreaming. I've personally never had somebody come to me in a dream, but there have been times when I'm alone and I get this overwhelming sense that one of my loved ones is with me. Sometimes I feel my uncle in the car with me. Sometimes it's my aunt in the kitchen with me. It's like their face pops up in my head and all of a sudden I have this warmth and feeling in my stomach that somebody's right beside me. I'll talk to them and end up sobbing because it seems like they're right there in front of me. I know it's not the same as seeing them. That's why I haven't told anybody, because I feel like most people would think it's just all in my head. I just wanted to get it out here. Maybe it is all in my head, but I hope it isn't. I'd like to think that they hang around. An angel fixed my flat. The year was 2011. I had just graduated from high school the previous year. We lived in Houston, and my parents decided to move out to Dayton, Texas. Something they were planning since basically forever. Moving there was nice, but all my friends were still in Houston, so on the weekends I would drive to Houston for parties. A 40 or 45-minute drive. One day I was driving down this back road numbered 1413. It's well lit, But back then, it was very lonesome and dark. Hardly any street lamps to light up the asphalt. As I'm driving down in my '04 Pontiac Grand Prix, I feel a rumble in my steering wheel followed by a sudden release of air from one of my front tires. I pull over and immediately get out and yep, just my luck, blown tire. Not only was it flat, it had a gaping hole on the sidewall, big enough to where I put my hand in it and touched the inside of my wheel. To add to my luck, I had used my spare on the back wheel 2 days before, so now I'm stuck. The signal was horrible. Trying to reach my dad on the phone was not happening. About 10 minutes go by, and as I'm walking around the street with my phone in the air trying to get at least one bar of reception, I notice vehicle headlights going over some train tracks about a quarter-mile back. I immediately start waving my hands, thinking maybe this individual will help me out somehow. As the truck gets closer, I notice it's an older model Ford, like a late 80s red and in pristine condition. The truck pulls over behind me and I come to the passenger window. I see an older gentleman in his 60s maybe, long white beard, white hair, wearing jean coveralls. He asks if I'm okay. I responded with, "Yeah, my tire's blew. I don't have a spare." He opens his door, chuckling lightly, and says, "Well, let me take a look." Mind you, I have tiny scrapes on my hand from the wire sticking out of my tire. I said to him, "It's got a giant hole in it." And I see him squat by the passenger tire, and he said, "Go in my toolbox and get me the flashlight that's back there." I run to the other side of the truck and open the toolbox in the bed. It was completely empty and still shiny as if it was never used. Only one flashlight was present, so I grab it, not thinking much of it at the time, trying to turn it on for him. But as I pass up to his driver's side door, I see him standing up. I flash the light at him and says, "You're good to go." Confused, I walk up to him and shine the light at the tire. It was inflated. I could see where the sidewall was dirty from it running flat, but it was inflated. I never understood the term. My mind was blank until after this experience. My mind was truly blank. Not once did I think of asking him how, or any of the obvious questions one would ask in a similar situation, just blank. I look up at him and he puts his hand on my shoulder. "Just be careful wherever you're going, son. I'm sure your parents are worrying about you driving late at night." I said, "Thank you, sir, thank you." I gave him his flashlight and watched him get back in his truck and start driving off. This section of the road had a turn not far from where I was. As he took off, it all came to me. All the questions I needed to ask just dropped into my brain all at once. I run to the driver's seat. I needed to catch up with him and ask him how. Speeding behind, trying to catch up, I see the truck hit that turn. I see his taillights behind the trees, maybe 5, maybe 6 seconds later, and I make that same turn, poof, it's gone. Disappeared into thin air. There was no other one on the road that we were on. I instantly got chills and slammed on my brakes, and I sat there for about 10 minutes before I got a call from my mom asking if everything was okay. Told her I'd be home in a bit. To this day, can't explain it. I think I died multiple times, and I've figured out the afterlife. So to begin, this of course is just my opinion, and it makes sense to me. So to get to the point, there's been times where something has happened in my life where I could have died. Examples are, had an ATV land on top of me from a great height, and I was very young and small, and my brother was on top of me as well. I've randomly passed out while doing some sort of vice like huffing pills or booze, and it's always been just I'm doing something and then boom! Time's gone past, and I'm immediately sober and confused as shit. My theory is this. This conscious version of me when I died, I jumped to another version of me in a different timeline to continue my life. And that timeline is now carrying on with me dead. Now the questions I ask myself, and you may be asking yours, how does this conscious version of me actually die? I don't know. Maybe I have to be chopped up or shot or something to destroy my body. Maybe it's the nature's way of interfering with us growing old and a natural life where people who died are still alive on another timeline with other consciousness. Or maybe I'm just overthinking things and I've actually passed out. No clue. I had this theory in my head for the last week after I had an incident and I smoked some weed to calm down, and all this could have just been a stoner thought. But I needed to vent it out so I could get it out of my system. My second ghost experience. I was raised in a big city in Mexico, in a house built around 1915. I was 14 at the time, and because of the large attendance at our school, I was enrolled in the evening classes, which started at 2:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. During this time, my mother and I were the only ones living in the house. I arrived home this particular night from school and went directly to the room where we had the TV. The house area resembled an inverted L, where you enter the house to your immediate left is the living room, kitchen, and 2 rooms. If you go straight, there's a long hallway followed by rooms and bathrooms. My mom was watching TV and I told her I was hungry. She said, okay, and left to the kitchen, and she practically sits on the opposite side of the house. I immediately turned my PlayStation on and was playing louder than I should have, but I heard my mom calling my name. Now, I grew up in this house, and I heard my mom called me probably thousands of times. Her voice always echoed through the hallway. On this occasion, this didn't happen. The best way I can describe it was that I half heard it and half imagined it. Paused the game and went to the door threshold and yelled back to see if she was calling me. Didn't hear anything. I ruled it as probably being me imagining it. Lowered the TV volume considerably and continued to play. Within a minute, I experienced it just as well. Clearly heard my mother call my name without the echo from the hallway, and as I had half imagined and half actually heard it again. Went to the door again and yelled back, still not sure if I just imagined it. I didn't hear an answer. I remember saying, she'll probably really call me again if she needs me, and decided to mute the TV. I hadn't still fully sat back down when I heard her call me again, but it wasn't her voice at all. It was a higher-pitched voice. At the same time, I heard a loud bang coming from the living room, and I did hear the echo of that bang travel through the hallway. My initial thought was that my mother had fallen, so I sprinted toward the kitchen. By the time I got to the house entrance, everything was pitch dark. Called my mom, but there was no noise at all and no lights. I felt extreme chills, and I didn't have the willpower to even enter the living room and turn the lights on. The only lights were the street lights outside, so my instinct was to get out. I went outside, and while I was trying to catch my breath, I saw my mother barely walking back into our dead-end street. Apparently, when she left the room, she had gone to the store to buy some dinner. She obviously asked me what I was doing outside, and I told her everything that had just happened. I wasn't expecting for her to be surprised the way that I was, but she was all calm and said that basically she had exactly the same experience happen to my aunt when they bought the house in 1979. Apparently, she also heard my mom calling her 3 times, and on the third loud bang. I was never told this story. It just made it kind of the worst in my opinion. This was my second big experience and definitely made me a true believer. Old Lady and the Cheese Can. I've only had 2 encounters with the paranormal in my life, and this one is the first one that I had. I was around 8 or 9 when it happened. I was raised in a fairly large populated city in Mexico, and I was in a Pentecostal family. Every so often, my mom would help a couple who had just started their own church. On this particular night, they weren't going to a velada, which is basically a service where they just keep worshiping until very late hours into the night. Usually, children don't attend these events, and we slept across the church from the couple's home. The couple had 3 children. 1 kid, 3 or 4 years older than me, a sister, and a younger brother who's probably 2 years younger than me. They set up a makeshift bed in the living room where us 3 boys slept. Obviously, we didn't go to sleep, and we just played until the older brother fell asleep. His younger brother and I were still awake. This home was small and still under construction. On our immediate right of the makeshift bed, there was the kitchen, and toward our left side, it led to rooms. Half of the living room was full with boxes. I believe they were still moving in. Anyhow, we started hearing noises in the kitchen as somebody was moving them. At first, it was very subtle, and truthfully, I didn't even notice until the little brother mentioned it. He sounded scared. I remember telling him that it was probably a ghost feeding his kids in an attempt to calm him down. It worked because he laughed. He kept adding to the story. The noises did increase, but I just remember us making the stories more absurd by the minute. We were just laughing big time. At one point, the little brother was sitting up in bed with his back against the wall. I was underneath the covers completely over my head, and all of a sudden he goes, "Mira, look," as he's pointing. And I obviously looked. There was this old lady walking really slow from the kitchen. She had long hair and had a red hair tie. Her bottom dress also had lots of different colors running vertically. But the biggest thing was we could also see through her. The only light that was illuminating the room was coming from the street through the window in front of our makeshift bed. I distinctly remember the corner where the living room meets the kitchen being illuminated by the street light. As she walked in from that area, we could still see that same light hitting the corner instead of her casting a shadow. The only thing she was doing was that it looked like she was holding with her left hand a large can, one of those larger Nido milk powder cans if you grew up in Mexico. And that was not see-through, but on her right hand it looked like she was crumbling something on top of the can. She walked past in front of us and simply kept walking toward the room to our left. I told the little brother to cover himself, but still in a funny manner, which he complied. Then we simply fell asleep. I didn't feel any fear at the moment, but I was really amazed at the fact that she was transparent, and that particular where the light was hitting. The following morning, we told our parents the entire experience, but of course, they didn't believe us. About a week later, this couple came to visit my mom, which was a common event since they visited often. But the moment they arrived, my mom called me because they wanted to ask me something, quote unquote. When I approached them, they asked me to retell them the story, which truthfully was something I had already kind of taken out of my mind. I proceeded to repeat the entire experience in detail, and they simply listened tentatively. As soon as I finished, they turned over to my mother and told her that they found a can behind some boxes in an area that we couldn't have been able to reach according to them. Found a cheese crumbled in it. They had a side business making queso fresco cheese. The smell is what alerted them to the find. It wasn't until I saw my mother's reaction and their serious faces that I got really scared. The couple ended up splitting after a year or so due to the husband cheating. The wife was from another state in Mexico, and she moved with her 3 kids, and that's how we no longer kept contact with them. About a couple of years ago, the sister found me through Facebook, and we reconnected. Her little brother was also on Facebook, so I also ended up reconnecting with him as well, I guess, but I just needed to hear some sort of confirmation that it all really had happened. And on our very first conversation, I asked him if he remembered the old lady that we saw. He said yeah, without wanting to elaborate more. See ya.